Imagine floating in the middle of the ocean, with no food, no fresh water, nothing but open sea in every direction. The sun burns your skin by day, the cold cuts through you at night. Days turn into weeks, and your body starts eating itself just to keep you alive. Now imagine the person next to you, starving just like you, starts looking less like a friend and more like your only chance of survival. This isn't fiction. This actually happened, not once, but multiple times. And what these survivors did to stay alive was so disturbing, some of it was hidden from the public for over a century. This is the true story of what desperation does to the human mind, and how far people will really go just to survive. In 1820, a whaling ship called the Essex was sailing the Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles from land. Then something almost unheard of happened. A sperm whale, nearly as long as the ship itself, rammed into the hull. Twice. On purpose. The ship sank. 20 men escaped into 3 small lifeboats with barely any food and almost no fresh water in the middle of the largest ocean on Earth. They had a choice: sail toward nearby islands, rumored to be inhabited by cannibals, or take a much longer route toward South America. Terrified of the rumors, they chose the longer route, a decision that would cost most of them their lives. Within weeks, the food ran out. Men began dying of starvation and dehydration, and that's when the survivors made a decision that still shocks historians today. They started eating the bodies of their dead crewmates, just to survive one more day. But it didn't stop there. As more men died and food kept running out, the survivors did something even darker. They drew lots, a lottery, to decide who would be killed so the others could eat and live. One of the men who died this way was just a teenager. The person forced to shoot him was his own crewmate, a decision that haunted him for the rest of his life. Out of 20 men, only 8 survived. This real event later inspired Herman Melville's novel Moby Dick. In 1816, a French Navy ship called the Medusa ran aground off the coast of West Africa. There weren't enough lifeboats for everyone on board, so the crew built an emergency raft, and roughly 150 people were placed on it with almost no food or water. The raft was supposed to be towed to shore. Instead, it was cut loose and left to drift. What happened next became one of the most infamous survival stories in history. Fights broke out over the scraps of food. People were thrown overboard. Some drank seawater and lost their minds from the salt poisoning. And as starvation set in, survivors began eating the flesh of those who had already died. By the time a passing ship spotted the raft, 13 days later, only 15 people were still alive. Most were barely recognizable, sunburned, starved, and psychologically shattered. The event became so notorious that a French painter turned it into one of the most famous paintings in history, a haunting depiction of desperation at sea. In 1884, 4 sailors were stranded in a lifeboat after their ship, the Mignonette, sank in a storm. They had almost no food. After weeks adrift, one of the crew, a 17-year-old cabin boy, became dangerously ill from drinking seawater. The remaining men made a decision. They killed the boy and used his body to survive until they were rescued days later. But here's what makes this case different from the others. When the survivors returned home, they didn't hide what happened. They were honest about it, and they were put on trial for murder. The case became a legal landmark. For the first time, a court ruled that extreme necessity, even starvation, it was not a legal defense for killing another person. The survivors were convicted, though their sentences were later reduced. It raised a question that still isn't fully settled today. If your survival depends on someone else's death, does that make you a murderer or just a product of the situation? Extreme starvation doesn't just affect the body. It fundamentally changes how the brain works. Decision-making, empathy, and impulse control are among the first things to deteriorate. Studies on famine survivors have shown that prolonged starvation can trigger paranoia, hallucinations, and a complete narrowing of focus down to one single goal: staying alive at any cost. In other words, these weren't monsters. They were ordinary people, and their brains were being reshaped in real time by extreme physical deprivation. It's one of the most unsettling truths about human psychology. The line between civilized behavior and pure survival instinct is much thinner than most of us would like to believe. These stories aren't meant to shock for the sake of it. They're a window into what happens when the human mind is pushed to its absolute limit. Most of us will never face anything close to this, but these survivors remind us of something uncomfortable. Survival instinct doesn't care about morality. It only cares about one more day. If you found this as disturbing and as fascinating as I did, subscribe to Neural Army, because next time we're going even deeper into the darkest corners of human psychology and history.